This is George Newbern, the voice of Superman, and you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
5 young fighters drawn from the corners of the universe. When they band together, they become the world's most superb fighting force and take on the Earth's toughest challenges, like finding the remote control.
How could you lose the remote?
What makes you so sure I lost it?
Cartoon Network presents Starfire.
You must meet my friends.
Cyborg.
Oh yeah, back in the league.
Beast Boy.
Yo, whose turn to do dishes?
Raven.
This party is pointless.
Everything's pointless. Want to go talk about it?
And Robin.
Loser. Jerk.
What did you say?
In a new series about fighting for truth, justice, and the last slice of pizza. Teen Titans.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 177 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good friend, good brother, and the man that runs our Twitter account, it is Liam. Liam, welcome to episode 177 of the DCAU Review, our final week in our month of Elseworlds episodes that we are covering for the year 2021, wrapping up our Elseworlds Villains Month. And as we announced last week, we got a pretty special one today.
That is right. Somehow we've gotten to 177 episodes of this show, our show, without talking about one of the most iconic DC animated projects that there is, and certainly one that's very, very special to me in particular. That being the Teen Titans animated series that began in 2003, and we're finishing off Villains Month with a look at the first episode to air of that show, Final Exam.
There we go. And we'll get into the show a little bit here, Liam. As you mentioned, this was running simultaneously with, I guess, Justice League Unlimited. So there was some dueling of the two shows, both on Cartoon Network, of course. And remember, this was originally, there was some speculation before this aired whether or not it was going to take place in the DCAU. Obviously, that's still somewhat can be debated, I suppose. I know there are people that are able to jam this into DCAU continuity somehow, but generally speaking, not considered to be main DCAU continuity here, which is why we are covering it in our Elseworlds month here. But there are definitely some DCAU connections, as we will talk about not only in some of the voice cast, obviously Robin being a character that is covered in several of the Batman DCAU cartoons that we have covered so far, but also one of the executive producers, Mr. Glenn Murakami, is definitely has his roots also in the DCAU itself.
Yeah, that's right. Glenn Murakami, of course, was a producer on Batman Beyond and Justice League, first season of Justice League, as well as working as an art director and storyboard artist, character designer on Superman, and even going all the way back to the original Batman the Animated Series. So, yes, a long tenured member of his of the DCAU production staff. This is sort of the first example of what a lot of those folks would go on to do, similarly to what James Tucker went on to do with Batman the Brave and the Bold, some of his other various DC animated projects. This was Glenn Murakami's first sort of big, showrunner, head producer show that he helmed along with David Slack and Sam Register, Linda Steiner. And Bruce Timm, we were talking about this a little bit before we went on the air, Cal. Bruce Timm is credited as a producer on this show for the first 2 seasons, although my understanding, and I couldn't find an exact quote to back this up when I was doing my research, but I'm reasonably certain that his name was more just there when it was part of like the pitch phase. He sort of attached his name to it to help the show get off the ground, as it were, and get sold and to Cartoon Network and eventually Kids WB. But he was not actively involved with it. But obviously, Glenn Murakami being one of the Bruce Timm proteges, that obviously his influence is still felt, despite the fact that this show really does immediately strike out on its own from anything we've seen before in the main DCAU.
Yeah, absolutely. It's its own style of animation, as we'll get into once we get into the visuals here in our main category. But Liam, before we get into those main categories, we of course have the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode. And this episode, as mentioned, aired back on July 19th. 2003, meaning we just passed the 18-year anniversary of this episode debuting. Yep, it's official. It's officially an adult. This episode can vote now, Liam. So, yeah, makes you feel old, doesn't it?
A little bit. That and all the gray hairs I see when I'm looking in the mirror. But yes. As you said, Cal, we will get the official IMDb synopsis for Final Exam, which was written by Rob Hoagie, directed by Michael Chang, with music by Michael McQuistion and animation by Dong Wu. And that synopsis reads as such: Slade hires the newest graduates of the Hive to take on the Teen Titans.
All right, short but sweet.
Yeah, pretty accurate. And that's something we can get into as we get into our plot here, is that especially I think a lot of the episodes in this first season of Teen Titans, but this one maybe being the greatest example of it, it's got a real frenetic, like fast-paced energy, and there's no like B or C plots to it. So we're kind of right off to the races, and it's a lot of punching, it's a lot of action, a lot of fun stuff. Certainly, like you said, that we'll get into in the visuals and animation section. But as far as the episode goes, yeah, we kick off with a video sort of displaying the powers of this trio of Hive students, Jinx, Gizmo, and Mammoth.
The Hive Academy for Extraordinary Young People is proud to introduce this year's top graduates. Gizmo, the boy genius whose intellect can conquer any problem with an inventive solution. Jinx, the enchanting sorceress, whose powerful hexes mean bad luck for her enemies. And Mammoth, the genetically enhanced giant whose unstoppable strength speaks for itself. Well-organized, highly trained, and combat-equipped, these new Hive agents are the perfect fighting force.
And they're being introduced to the main villain of the piece, Slade, who, just so we're clear on these arbitrary rules that we set for ourselves, we did talk about Deathstroke when we reviewed Batman: The Adventures Continue Season 1, and so therefore he qualified to be in this Elseworlds villain month. So there.
Yeah, we must adhere to the arbitrary rules that we are making up on the spot. So, we are following the rules here. But yeah, so Slade as and fun factoid for those that aren't maybe familiar with the Teen Titans show. I think we mentioned it last week when we were previewing this week's episode. But Cartoon Network standards, or perhaps just the showrunners themselves, decided that Deathstroke was not appropriate for the younger age that this show was geared towards. I guess the word death and stroke being combined was a little bit too vicious. So they went with his, obviously Slade Wilson is his alter ego. So going with the name Slade, which does in effect sound still very menacing, especially the way that it's repeated several times, but maybe not quite as menacing as Deathstroke is, though.
Yeah, it doesn't look as good on like a comic book cover, but it's still effective and ominous, and we'll certainly get into that in voice acting later on. But But yeah, we get the Hive being introduced to him as sort of potential new henchmen, and he tells them that if they want to work for him, they will start by destroying the Teen Titans, and that's sort of where we kick off what is really, as I said, the only through plot, the only really plot of the episode. The Titans are arguing. We see the Titans Tower. They're sort of introduced as this sort of dysfunctional family. And I guess we should note here, and I think I may have even mentioned this last week, Cal, but so the first episode in production order is Divide and Conquer, which is an episode that actually aired third in the series. But this is the first one to actually air, and I thought this was a better representation of the Slade character and some of the villains. I think it works better as a pilot than that other episode does. That one is much more focused on Robin and Cyborg only. So it's really interesting because they just throw us right into it. The Titans are sort of introduced as this dysfunctional family. They're arguing over, the TV remote and whatever. And then in the midst of trying to find a snack, Starfire shoots a piece of moldy food, and in light of making a mess, they decide to go out for pizza.
Right. Yeah. So that of course is what we've always talked about as hard-hitting, deep plots here is, what do you do when you cannot find the remote and all of your food is covered in blue mold? You go out for pizza. It's used as a way to sort of introduce the characters here. So you have Star Sapphire, or not Star Sapphire. We have Starfire, who is certainly the innocent, sweet character that is oblivious to how she says things, the way that she says things, and uses the English language. So just adorably innocent is her character. Then we have Raven, of course, who is the dark, ominous, brooding character, and an emo kid, if I had to bet. Then you have comic relief that's sort of split up between, not so much in this episode, but split between Cyborg and Beast Boy. Beast Boy a little bit heavier on the comedic side, and we learn, of course, in this episode that he's vegan. So he's not a meat eater, as he and Cyborg have an argument over what toppings they're going to put on the pizza. And it's at this point that he admits that he's been most of the animals that would be on a meat lover's pizza, so he doesn't feel comfortable doing that. And then Robin is sort of the de facto leader, although Cyborg, I would say, displays leadership categories as well throughout the episode and then throughout the series. But they are interrupted before they're able to fully enjoy their meal by a baby that is stuck in a baby carriage, in the old classic trope, the baby carriage stuck out in the middle of the road in a runaway bus. And as they go to stop the bus, they realize that there is no driver on the bus, and there's also no baby in the carriage. And wouldn't you know it, Liam, it's a trap set by none other than the Hive themselves, who we were briefly introduced to at the beginning of the episode, that being Gizmo, Jinx, and Mammoth, who have set this trap in order to attempt to do away with the Titans, as it were.
Titans, go! Don't buses normally have drivers? And don't baby carriages normally have babies?
Are you pit sniffers normally this stupid? That was too easy. What a bunch of kludge heads. You guys want to get pizza?
This isn't over. We're just getting started.
Who are these guys? And what's a clutch head? We are the Hive.
Your worst nightmare.
And this is attack pattern Alpha.
Yeah, that's one of the more that's sort of the rest of the episode from there almost. They have this fight, and I think the idea that they're trying to go for is that they show very early on that the Hive are very well trained. They're calling out attack patterns with certain names, and they're sort of pairing off in interesting ways and sort of, using the Titans' weaknesses against them, and they're just sort of, the Titans seem sort of overmatched and they're caught off guard and they can't really get anything going because they keep being sort of cut off, and two of them get knocked down and then one of them's trying to face off with the others, and then the second Hive member comes in to distract him, and that's sort of illustrated as they're getting beat up. Cyborg has a rocket strapped to his back and is shot off into the sky. Starfire flies off after him. Robin, Beast Boy, and Raven try to stop it, but Raven and Beast Boy are taken out pretty quickly, and that leaves Robin by himself, and it does not go well for Robin.
Yeah, he's ready to face down Mammoth, and Mammoth does this sort of superpower thing that superpowered giant strongmen do, where he clasps his hands together and breaks up all of the concrete, forcing Robin to fall apparently to his death, unsure, as they're unable to locate him. There's sort of a cliffhanger commercial break, and then we flash back to Titan's Tower, where we learn that Cyborg and Starfire, who were sort of jettisoned off in the middle of the fight, show back up to the tower, certainly ready to hear about the defeat of the Hive and how they ended up overcoming this hive of villainy. And unfortunately, not only are they greeted with the fact that they didn't quite wave the victory flag, but that in the process that all that was recovered from the sewers was Robin's utility belt. And from there, things kind of go from bad to worse, as very shortly thereafter, as they're sort of coming to grips with the idea that Robin may not be around anymore. The Hive shows up right at Titan's Tower and pretty handedly takes care of the Titans. There's an initial back and forth, but at some point Gizmo hacks into Cyborg's systems and is able to actually detach one of his arms, and pretty much at that point the Titans are ousted from their own tower, leaving them kind of running away with their tails between their legs almost. And it is at this moment that after being overcome by a wave and washing up on a shore, they look back and see that their T tower, the Titan Tower, has been transformed into a giant H now, standing for the Hive. And from there, the Hive sort of gets to bask in their apparent victory over the Titans, and the Titans sort of wonder aloud how in the world they're going to recover from this now that Robin is gone and they've been unable to overcome this group of dastardly villains.
Yeah, I mean, Cyborg's really ready to just throw in the towel. And to be fair, he did have his arm. He did lose an arm. And they did get their butts kicked twice, but the team is in shambles, and finally Robin sort of comes back into frame.
So, who else never wants to go surfing again?
Not now, man.
Hey, I was just trying to.
Perhaps I could be of some assistance.
I got it.
But you are so damaged and...
I got it!
Hey, she only wanted to help. What is your problem?
What do you think? We got kicked out of our house, a pint-sized Poindexter took me for a joyride, and in case you haven't noticed, I just became left-handed!
Enough! We need to control our emotions.
Or what? Our bad vibes will keep you from meditating?
I wish Robin were here.
Well, he's not. Don't you guys get it? They won, we lost. It's over!
Then the
Teen Titans are finished?
Not yet. Not if I can help it.
They do make a point of him losing his utility belt after the initial fight, and so I guess you can say he didn't have any gadgets, didn't have a radio to call the Titans to let them know he was alive, so he was just like walking back to the tower for the last couple of hours or however much time was.
Couldn't hitchhike. Nobody would give Robin a ride.
Right. Yeah, apparently didn't have any money for a payphone or anything. So
yeah, it's 2003, so no Ubers are around probably. Right. So it's not available necessarily to do that. But geez, Louise, man.
Yeah, so he did a nice brisk jog like Burt Ward Robin before him, I guess, back to the tower, and and then they regroup, and we get our sort of final act there as Cyborg's able to remote control his arm into sort of hacking into the tower, setting off a bunch of crazy defenses and grabbing Gizmo and shooting off, and the arm flies and brings Gizmo up through the ventilation system outside. Meanwhile, Raven grabs Jinx, and a mysterious green bolt of energy knocks Mammoth into an elevator. And so the Hive are now kind of, the tables have been turned. The Hive are sort of off their game. They don't know what's happening. And the Titans have regrouped, and we have one kind of big climactic fight. This time the Titans are very much taking a page out of what the Hive did to them earlier, catching them off guard and working together to sort of keep the Hive off balance and protect each other. And they are able to pretty soundly defeat the Hive this time. And at that point, Gizmo is ready to throw in the towel himself, and says that he's going to make a call to Slade, and then that's sort of the finale of our episode here. Is Robin asks, "Who is Slade?" and that's sort of the end of the scene, and we get a little bit more as the headmistress of the Hive Academy is apologizing to Slade for the failure of the Hive, and Slade reveals that actually he never really expected the Hive to destroy the Teen Titans, and that it was more about sending a message, and that message has been received.
I assure you, such failures are not tolerated within the Hive. Once the agents have been retrieved from the authorities, they will be disciplined. Strictly disciplined.
Actually, your agents served my plans quite well. I never expected them to succeed. They were merely messengers, and the message has been received.
Who is Slade? 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 Who is Slade?
And that leads us to our nice little quiet, like, family sitcom ending as Cyborg finally finds the remote. And they're sort of all talking about how, I guess we should be out there looking for clues and trying to figure out who Slade is. And Robin says, yeah, we'll do all of that, but right now it's just nice to be together. And they literally do a kind of a fourth wall breaking thing where Robin presses the button on the remote and our TV goes off. So it's a very like quirky sitcom way to end the episode.
For real. Yeah, there's a lot of quirkiness, I would say. Quirky is probably the word that best describes this episode of this show. So I guess we can get into our plot scores here, Liam. This is an interesting one because it definitely is a lot of action. I feel like it's lighter on the plot and more on the action piece itself. And a lot of the time that we spend with the groups, both the Hive and the Titans, is spent them fighting each other, battling each other. So there's a little less actual story being told here. It does move very quickly. The Titans are defeated. They're kind of left on this, shore, as we mentioned. And then before you know it, they're ready to take on the Hive again. And as long as they have Robin, they're regrouping and ready to figure out how to soundly defeat them this time. So it feels like it's a lot of Hive versus Titans for the episode itself, with kind of sandwiched in between these two Slade scenes. So with that, there's not a lot that's being told here. We learn a little bit about the characters themselves, as I said. We learn a little bit about their roles on the team, their general kind of personalities, and maybe some things about them. But there's not a whole lot done for this series other than, hey, let's have a quick little 22-minute little fight scene. It's the equivalent of just kind of like banging your action figures together for 15 minutes and then being like, oh yeah, and this is why these guys are fighting. Like this is why, and this is all part of this bigger plan that we're laying the groundwork for, which I appreciate, because I'm not sure if you mentioned it. We definitely talked about it before we went on the air, but you mentioned that this show is absolutely skewed towards a younger audience. It is not the Justice League or Batman the Animated Series age range necessarily. It's skewed a little bit younger, which we'll talk about in visuals certainly, and some of the other choices that they went with the show. But overall, I think it's fine as far as episode premieres or series premieres. Sometimes it's hard because you do have a lot to juggle. This one, it feels like the opposite was happening. You didn't have a whole lot of groundwork to lay other than these sort of basic team roles, and even that I didn't feel is completely laid out all the way. So maybe it's suffering from the fact that this wasn't necessarily supposed to be the series premiere and just ended up being slotted in that position. I'm not sure. It's okay. It's a big bowl of okay in my opinion. So for that reason, I gave it a 6 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I went with the exact same score, a 6 out of 10. Yeah, that was something that struck me, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit in voice acting later too. The roles and sort of the character archetypes of these characters were so clear in my mind, having been such a big fan of the series, that it's hard to remember that, a lot of that character development came later on, towards the end of the first season, certainly, but then certainly in the subsequent 4 seasons that came after that. They weren't maybe quite as clearly defined at this point, beyond some sort of basic stuff like Raven being very stern and Cyborg being a little bit of a hothead and Starfire being a bit naive and things like that. There's certainly those basic elements there, but they're still at this point in the series, whether you watch this as the first episode or the third episode, we're still kind of a little ways away from really sort of ironing out who these characters are. So yeah, I think it's still fun, and this episode in particular, and this series as a whole, like I said, has a lot of deep nostalgia roots. Like I watched this just a few hours before we recorded this episode, which is live, of course. So
always live. Whenever you played the
hours ago.
That's right.
Always live. But I remembered like every scene, almost every action beat, it's just I watched this episode so many times. I had it on videotape, plus it would air in reruns all the time, and for whatever reason, the kids WB versions of when they would air the show, this one was always on. So I remember it deeply, and I have a lot of fondness for it on that level. But as an episode, like I said, like you said, it does have those bookended Slade moments to let you know that there's this sinister puppet master working behind the scenes. But as a standalone episode, it's a little light. It's pretty fluffy as far as what it actually does to deepen the character motivations and such.
All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which will be the visual and animation for this week's episode. So we talked a little bit about the anime Eastern animation style here, and I know they dubbed this, gave it its own brand, because it's not one-to-one, not straight up Eastern anime. It's not a Yu-Gi-Oh, it's not a Last Airbender, it's not a Attack on Titan, whatever your favorite anime to watch. But there's definitely some heavily influenced different aspects to the animation, and whether it's character reactions, that the characters' general shape of their faces and eyes, some of the way that they there's not flash scenes, but scenes where they'll talk and suddenly there's miniature versions of themselves on the screen, sort of acting out whatever it is they're describing. There's several different things that occur that let you know that this is a very different type of animation than we're typically used to with the series that we've covered thus far.
Yeah, absolutely. This was sort of dubbed, as you mentioned, as Murakanime, this American and fusion of both American and Eastern animation styles. Glenn Murakami talked about how, yes, obviously the anime stuff is very much in there, things like Akira, things like Dragon Ball Z, but at the same time, a deep, almost as much of an influence was things like Tex Avery or Chuck Jones or some of those earlier Looney Tunes cartoons, and I think you see that, and it is really a melding of that style of that Eastern anime style and of the DC Warner Brothers animation style. So it really is it's completely its own subgenre of animation, and it really makes this show have a really unique flavor to it. And I think you see that in the character designs. I remember reading an interview with Murakami where he thought, whereas Batman the Animated Series had this sort of alternate 30s or 40s look to it, he sort of saw the Teen Titans show as having this sort of alternate 50s look to it. And I think you see that more in other episodes, but I think you can even see that when they're in the city and there's sort of the architecture and the design of the cars and some of the background character models you see. It's sort of this it's a very clean and a little bit sleeker, but still sort of has this sort of retro feel to some of the design, some of the backgrounds, and then you get some really wacky stuff like when it comes to the actual animation, like you mentioned, there's the scene where they're fighting in the tower and then they're all sort of thrown out of the tower, and the tower is literally like dancing and bouncing and then sort of spits all of the Titans out of it before they all land in the water. Like it's a very, very silly and sort of wacky moment.
Yeah, and that was definitely something that I had noted as, man, that's straight out of a Looney Tune. It bottles up and then all of a sudden spits out all the Titans onto the into the water very, 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 very emphatically. So that was definitely something. I also had some notes here with the architecture. The very first scene where they go to the restaurant, it's very cute. There's a sort of this overhead shot of the restaurant where they're sitting on this deck, and it, with the tables and chairs on the deck itself, it resembles a slice of pizza. So you have some cute winks and nods as you're watching the episode there. Of course, as we mentioned, there's lots of fun to be had, whether it is with that Eastern style of animation, but even beyond that, we mentioned there's a scene where Gizmo hacks Cyborg, causing him to detach one of his arms. He later mounts it in the tower after the hive is taken over, and he uses it as a trophy to celebrate their victory over the Titans. But meanwhile, Cyborg actually hacks back into his own arm, and so we get the scene where the arm itself is just walking around, spying on the hive throughout the tower and hacking into the Titans' own systems in order to freak the hive out. So there's definitely some fun there. I think as far as the character models are concerned, we can talk a little bit about the way that the Titans themselves look a little bit. The designs themselves, while having that flair from Eastern animation, for the most part, Beast Boy resembles pretty spot on to what he looked like in the comics. In that I guess that late 80s, 90s run, changed up his colors a little bit, but generally speaking, he resembles what you might imagine that famed Teen Titans run from the late 70s and 80s. If he was placed into more modern animation. Raven also adapted a little bit with the gray skin, but generally speaking, her giant purple hood with the black unitard underneath of it, and then you get Starfire, who also has definitely been made to look a little bit more modest than she has probably in past iterations, which is A-okay by me. Generally speaking, she has certainly covered up and looks a little bit more, I would say, youth group appropriate at this point. And then Cyborg, I think, is actually a lot of fun because he was always somebody that, despite being such an interesting character, that 80s George Perez style, I didn't love the way that he kind of had these, like, he had bare thighs that would hang out, and it was just also felt kind of awkward. This one feels like he feels like a giant robot, with some human parts added to it. So he feels a lot more like a machine than a classic DC iteration of this guy. Plus he's got those kind of bright blue highlights all over him that kind of detail the interworkings of the technology in him. And then Robin is your pretty standard 90s almost Tim Drake looking costume here. I think we eventually get confirmed that this is Dick Grayson, if I'm not mistaken here, but he's definitely in that 90s Tim Drake style costume, which, again, pants on teen superheroes, 2 thumbs up for me.
Yeah, at the time, I certainly remember there being some debate because he was in very much the Norm Brayfogle, Neil Adams Robin suit, and he had the bow staff and certainly appeared to be modeled after the Tim Drake Robin, but this is 100% the Dick Grayson Robin. The sort of the big design change, other than just the reds and the greens, is you have he has like these big steel-toed boots. But yeah, otherwise it's pretty much a straight sort of adaptation of that classic Robin suit into animation. Yeah, I like the Cyborg suit too, and there's something that I think a lot of the more modern Cyborg looks in movies, and in the comics miss, is that there's a difference between an android and a cyborg. Mm-hmm. Android is a full robot. Cyborg is part human, part robot, and I like that. Like he still has some skin showing, and he still feels like, even if he's 80% metal by this point, that there is still a man in there. And that's certainly a theme that comes up several times throughout the show as they're developing his character. It is his sort of struggle to feel human despite, having so much hardware wired into him. But yeah, so I love the Cyborg design, especially. I think the rest of the designs are good. That purple and black motif of Beast Boy was kind of a departure from the red and white suit that he had worn for most of the time he had been in the new Teen Titans run. But this is another show that, like Batman the Animated Series, like Superman and Justice League, went on to influence the comics with which it was based on. So a lot of these looks ended up getting adapted into the comics later on from this show. So yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in the design. I like the Hive characters. Jinx in the comics is like she's like bald and is look more like has more like, I guess, like a mystical look to her. In this version, she's more of like a weird, like anime pixie girl, I guess, like, for lack of a better term. She has white skin and this bright pink hair, and Gizmo in the comics is actually an adult man. He's a dwarf, but he is an adult. So making him a kid, I think, is certainly a fun choice there. And then you kind of have just Mammoth, as you said, just being a sort of archetypal big, strong, dumb guy, and that works well for him. Some of the scenes where he's eating all of the moldy food and stuff, I thought were pretty funny. And the scene where Gizmo is hacking Cyborg and is sort of running around, there's like some interesting work where you don't even quite see what's going on. You just see like Cyborg's shadow, and he's sort of yelling and running back and forth, and the arm shoots off in there. I think there's some fun stuff in that final battle too, from when the arm ties Gizmo up and flies him up through the vents to when the utility belt kind of goes flying through the air and Robin catches it, and we get like our hero poses of all the Titans standing together. And then that final battle as the Titans kind of come together and fight the Hive on their terms is, I think, really fun, with sort of all 5 of the Titans taking out Mammoth at the end. I think that's a fun bit. And And yeah, I think there's a lot of fun stuff here. And I really like the atmosphere of Slade's lair. It's almost entirely in shadow. And for a show that otherwise is super, super bright, I think those scenes really stand out because they're so dark. And really the only color, especially when Slade is talking, is you see his one eye and you see a little bit of the orange hue of his helmet, but that's kind of it.
Yeah, those scenes were done really, really well. Some of the backgrounds also kind of had that dot fill look of a comic book panel from like the 80s, which I absolutely loved. It was very subtle in the background, but it was, I'm sure it was very intentional, given the subject and the original material here. But I think those scenes, since that is the main thread that is being set up for the rest of the series here, made those scenes seem very impactful. You knew that they were different. There was an important reason for you to pay attention. There was the dark, ominous feel of the scenes because of the shadow work, and then because things did look differently. It really makes this guy feel like, all right, who is this guy? Who is Slade? Who is the Robin's asking that question, but at the same time, as the viewer, you're also asking, all right, who is this? Who is this Slade person? And why should we care about him? Who is he? Why is he sending this group to attempt to defeat the Titans? Or what type of message is he sending? And all of that is communicated very well through the visuals. And as we'll talk about in just a second, the voice performance as well. But I think I'm not a fan typically of the more Eastern animation style. I think we've talked about that before. I've certainly grown accustomed to it because it's definitely more prevalent, especially in the DC direct-to-video movies, and more modern animation tends to be a little bit more heavily influenced by that. So I've grown to appreciate it. It's not my first choice. It's not my first love when it comes to animation itself, but I can appreciate it. One of the two of the things that I noticed is there's a scene where initially Robin is facing off against Gizmo in the initial battle that they have, and there's this sort of pan that happens. The camera is set behind Gizmo, and it sort of shifts a little bit and pans, and the characters stay in place, but the background sort of shifts, giving them this sort of pan 3D style. And they did that a couple of times, characters jumping across the screen. The backgrounds were designed to look like that they were moving, but they were actually static. So the character moving made it look like they were moving faster, or they were leaping across a certain section. So I loved that. And one of the things that I really liked was when Raven appeared in a couple of the scenes. There was a literal shadow of a raven itself that appears before she sort of materializes in her human form. So you get this little dark shadow that pops up as a bird silhouette, and then all of a sudden she appears out of it. So some good transition stuff, some really neat visuals and stuff that caught my eye there. With that said, again, not my favorite animation style. It did feel like there was a lot of punching and kicking that was done here, but at the same time, I think because it's probably a TV Y7 rating here in the US, geared towards a younger audience, there wasn't as much quote unquote violence as that you would see on one of the standard DCAU shows. Even a lot of white flashes coming across, seeing guys' hands come back and then a white flash, or people about to collide, and then you see you hear them collide off screen, or something that sort of gives you the impression of violence without actually showing it. With all that said, I think there's enough here to certainly enjoy. So I ended up giving visuals a 7 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I went just a tick higher. I went 8 out of 10. I don't know if the show later on, if there was any conscious redesigns, or if this is just sort of a different animation team than they used. This was Dongwoo Animation. But I did feel like, I think especially Cyborg and Beast Boy and even Raven do a little bit, they didn't look exactly how I remembered them looking, and whether or not that's just my brain playing tricks on me, or if it's just the models were changed a little bit, or if this is just a different animation team than I was used to. There's definitely some things where I think you like we've been saying, we know where it's going because we have the benefit of hindsight, being able to know where the rest of the show goes, and some of this stuff gets ironed out and fixed or tweaked slightly to improve it. But yeah, there was a little bit with I think almost all of the Titans where it's like they tweaked some of this a little bit, and and I think that shows that this still being a pretty early episode. But yeah, overall, I think the action, especially in some of those really unique color palettes and stuff in the Slade scene, certainly that still gives it a very strong 8 out of 10.
Absolutely. It's also hard because your mind plays tricks on you, because obviously sort of a derivative of this, and certainly using the same voice and characters and a lot of the same stuff as the Teen Titans Go show that has now been on for, umpteen years and is always on Cartoon Network. And that you and I, although not always a popular opinion amongst fans, love and appreciate Teen Titans Go. But it's hard sometimes because, I was expecting, Raven, as we'll talk about in her voice acting, Tara Strong's voice is definitely, her portrayal of Raven is completely different in this episode, perhaps even later on in the series itself, to what we end up getting in Teen Titans Go. So yeah, could be some mind tricks happening there too. So we'll be interested to see when we review more of these down the line. Moving on to our next category, Liam, which is going to be music. And I am going to say, with the exception of just the absolutely phenomenal earworm that is the theme song for this show, I'm going to have to say that the music felt weirdly out of place for me for almost the entirety of the episode. I was expecting something very similar to what we got for the theme itself. Some of those high pitched, sort of like almost like 60s sounding rock. And what we ended up getting, there's a lot of weird piano and synth. It almost feels like they had an original soundtrack for this episode, and then when they uploaded it to YouTube, they got a copyright strike, so they had to swap it out for like rights-free music instead. That's just kind of like generic. So I was not really impressed, and it felt like there were times where the music maybe didn't even quite match the action that was happening on the screen. What did you think of music for the show?
Yeah, it feels, I think I noticed, especially there's some, I think there's a little bit of guitar in the first battle scene when they're in the city, and then there's like a lot of organ brought in there, and even like a little bit of horns, and it's like this really sort of, it felt like a Scooby-Doo or something, like where it's just like this it's like very frenetic and fast paced, and they do bring in some guitar. But it's not really what you would consider for a show that has such strong like Eastern anime influence. You would expect maybe some more like really rocked out guitar and really dramatic, fast paced drums and things like that. And we don't really get that. It's sort of this very, I guess a very like 50s, like sock hop rock music. Like, It's very sort of this like very sort of soft 50s rock and roll vibe to it, with like this organ and a little bit of guitar mixed with that piano and some really sort of a little bit more basic drumming. Michael McQuistion, of course, is a veteran of all of these DC animated shows, did the music here. And yeah, this one in particular, I feel, has a very very unique soundtrack to it. I think especially earlier in the episode. I think towards the end, when they're having that final battle scene, they bring in more of the electric guitar, and the drums are a little bit harder, and they're sort of punctuating it with the towards the end there, when they're sort of delivering these final blows to Mammoth and stuff. So I think it picks up there. But yeah, it's definitely a little bit of an odd vibe. It's not a lot of strings, nor is it a lot of the sort of more hard rock Batman Beyond or JLU music. It's sort of this very weird, like, and I guess maybe it was trying to match the aesthetic of the show, where it's sort of this weird, like, like I said, like it's keep coming back to like 50s, like sock hop, like you're going to a dance, you're going to the prom at the in like 1950 in like Back to the Future or something. Like it's got this really like weird like there's like organ constantly just playing with the drums and the guitar and stuff. It's weird.
Yeah, weird is I think the word of the day for the music. It's and maybe it's just because the theme the theme song is so unique in the way that it sounds and the way that they use, I guess it's organ that's used as the prominent instrument, organ or synthesizer that's used in for the prominent part of the theme song for the melody, but it just didn't quite match up. There's a point where there's like drums over synth with piano also mixed into it when they're doing the initial battle in the city between the Hive and the Titans. And I was just like, man, this is a little distracting. Like this doesn't match what I feel like the what I'm experiencing watching this. Like it just didn't quite match up to me. And I maybe maybe it's just the episode itself. Maybe this changes. I don't remember the music necessarily being that off. But I maybe also in my head I was thinking that it would match a little bit more closer to things that we've seen in the Batman animated series, the one that also took place on Kids WB that had more of that rock interludes that would just kind of show up, and I was expecting some of that instead that would play into it. But yeah, it was at times it just felt very weird. Weird's the word of the day. So for all those reasons, I ended up giving music a 5 out of 10 for this week. What about you?
Yeah, I went a tick higher. I went 6 out of 10. I still there's parts, like I said, I think the music towards the end is better and more appropriate. I even kind of like they have this like really soft like piano music behind when they're introducing the Hive right at the start of the episode, where there's this voiceover sort of explaining their various powers and everything, and they're showing them doing all this dramatic and destructive stuff, but it has this like really soft like intro video that you would maybe see if you were watching a video at school or something. So I appreciated that touch in the music as well. And of course the theme song, which was written by Andy Sturmer and obviously performed by the Japanese pop duo Puffy Amiyumi, who actually eventually got their own cartoon on Cartoon Network. But yeah, that theme song alone, I think, is going to bump it over to a 6 for me. But yeah, there's stuff I like, but I think the middle part of the episode is just it's like we've been saying, kind of weird, kind of quirky.
All right, Liam, let's move on to our final category for today, which is going to be our voice acting. And of course, we have a brand new cast of characters, a few voices who actually we've talked about in the last couple of weeks that we might recognize. Maybe a DCAU veteran or two that you might also recognize, and a cast of characters that will go on to be kind of the defining voices for some of these characters moving forward. So let's talk about today's voice cast, shall we?
Absolutely. Lots of names we've talked about before, but obviously in new roles. In our villains cast, we do have briefly the voice director and casting agent herself, Andrea Romano, playing the Hive headmistress. Was fun to hear her have a little cameo there. But we have, of course, Lauren Tom playing both Gizmo and Jinx, who, of course, is the voice of She Who Deserves Better, Dana on Batman Beyond, and a million other voice acting roles to her credit. But her playing, I think she really gets to show her sort of stretch her legs and show off her talent, because Jinx and Gizmo do not sound anything alike in this episode. And obviously Gizmo is a little boy and Lauren Tom is not. So she really gets to kind of flex her muscles and show off her talent here.
Yeah, she does a great job. No surprise. She gets cast frequently for various different animation roles. Certainly, as you mentioned, her role as Dana is certainly one of the better parts and bigger parts to play in the Batman Beyond series. So the fact we've talked about it a lot too. Sometimes you have somebody that plays multiple voices on a show, and there are people that it's very easy to tell that it's just somebody else, or it's one of the other characters, one of the main characters doing a different voice. But for her to have to play, now Jinx has not a lot of dialogue dialogue in the episode, but enough for you to hear her voice. And certainly Gizmo has quite a lot of dialogue throughout the episode. But yeah, differentiating between the two of them, probably a lot of fun for her, and certainly did a really great job doing so.
And I like that, sort of similarly to like Lobo and Superman the Animated Series, Gizmo has like weird made up curse words that mean nothing that he calls all of the Titans throughout the episode.
I love it.
Doesn't really mean anything, but they sound naughty. But yeah, we have her doing a great job there, and our other villain being Kevin Michael Richardson, who we've talked about a million times on our show before. Very talented voice actor, all over the place in a million different shows and movies, and yeah, here he is doing a pretty archetypal classic Kevin Michael Richardson voice. He's playing the big dumb goon, and he's doing a good job.
Yep, perfectly fine for what was asked of him. I would have loved to have seen him in a role that allowed him to get some more of those acting chops out that we've seen in other roles. But always nice to hear him coming through and hear him. I was kind of expecting him to give us a life lesson, sort of when he plays, Virgil's dad on Static, but no life lesson coming from Mammoth here, other than maybe don't count out the Titans, I guess.
There you go. And then, of course, our final villain we just get a little bit of, but we do have, of course, the great Ron Perlman as Slade, just being the menacing man, literally in the shadows for the entire episode. But we get to see him doing what he does sort of throughout this entire first season, which is sort of just appear and test the Titans from afar. For some as yet unknown diabolical reason. So it's a small sample size for him in this episode. He obviously gets a lot more to do later on in the season and in the series, but very cool to have him as the top bad guy. And as you mentioned, even though we're not using the Deathstroke name, between the Slade name and that the character design and his voice, he's still quite menacing.
Well, Mr. Slade?
Impressive, truly. However, robots and obstacle courses only prove so much. My plans demand operatives who can function in the real world. If your students are going to serve me, they'll have to pass one final exam. Destroy the Teen Titans, and then we'll talk.
Yeah, it's no surprise that the guy that played Hellboy, obviously the guy that voiced Clayface on Batman the Animated Series, and has probably done a lot of other notable work, Sons of Anarchy, lots of other stuff that he's been a part of. He's a really good actor, a very distinct voice, and as far as playing a villain, him getting the opportunity in this to play the villain of the entire series, pretty much here, the main overarching villain at least. A great job. Definitely a defining voice, I think, for this character specifically. I think if you were fan casting a Batman: The Adventures Continue TV series and you're looking to cast somebody as Deathstroke, I think that Ron Perlman might be the first person that you call up and say, "Hey, how would you like to voice Deathstroke in Batman animated form?" Because he does a really fantastic job. Very recognizable, identifiable voice, but it's completely different than what you would hear out of Matt Hagen as Clayface, and less theatrical, way toned down, and even in the little bit that we get to hear in this episode. But you can tell it's a little bit more understated, which allows you to kind of see that this is going to be a menacing character that's a little bit more cerebral, somebody that's a little bit more calculated, which is obviously a huge makeup and a huge part of that Deathstroke character, or should I say Slade character.
Yeah, absolutely. And that will bring us to our main 5 voice actors. We have Greg Sipes as Beast Boy, and this was one of the ones, and I think, like you said, Cal, part of this is maybe colored by me being maybe more recently hearing the voices in the Teen Titans Go version of this show, and which are a little bit, obviously a lot looser, a lot more comedic. But his voice, I think, even per this show, He's not quite speaking in what became, I think, the normal Beast Boy voice. It's a little more pitched down and a little bit more reserved, and not quite as certainly not quite as high pitched as he gets, I think, even later in this series, much less the Teen Titans Go run.
He doesn't have as much to do here, and as you said, certainly he is. I mean, it's all comedy in Teen Titans Go, but he is the main source of comedy oftentimes on that show. So it's a lot more, pun intended, animated in his delivery a lot of times for that show. So having been more familiar, and certainly more recently familiar with that show, it did feel like this was a way dialed down version of it. There was less fun and games to be had in this episode, with outside of the initial interaction between him and Cyborg looking for the remote, and then they're bickering about what toppings to put on the pizza. But I imagine there's probably an evolution of a lot of the way that these characters end up sounding from the earlier episodes, maybe throughout the series. So it will be, again, something else to look forward to when we hopefully cover some more of this down the line.
Absolutely. And speaking of which, we have Tara Strong, of course, Batgirl herself, and one or two other voices, I think, in animation across the way. But yeah, she's playing Raven here. And I think in the same way that I think Greg Sipes' Beast Boy is a little more pitched down, or a little bit of a lower voice than I'm used to, I think her voice is almost pitched up a little bit, in a way that I think, even in the rest of this series, I think she still delivery on a lot of her lines here, but it feels like it's pitched up. I don't know if it was artificially pitched up a little bit. I think especially in that opening scene where she and Cyborg are arguing over the remote, and a little bit later when she and Beast Boy are talking in the tower once Robin has disappeared. But again, like, it's just one of those things where I think you compare this to maybe the moments I remember most from the series being in, say, season 3 or 4 of the show, and here she is. Obviously this was still in, third in production order, so everybody's still certainly finding their footing. But none of the Titans really have a ton to do, but her perhaps least of all in this episode. She doesn't get much to do here, but obviously she's again the Raven voice, so there's you can still absolutely tell it's her, and that she's sort of begun to make this character her own.
Yeah, we don't even get an Azara Metrion Zinthos for this episode,
right?
So not a lot for her to do here. There's more visuals than I think anything for her, and totally agree with you that better work lies ahead for this character, certainly. And it definitely did not quite sound like the more modernized version of this voice that she tends to bring to the table. So I'm sure, again, an evolution of voice acting from, if you listen to some of those early, if you watch season 1 or 2 of The Simpsons versus what The Simpsons voices are nowadays, you'll also notice quite the evolution between the two of them. So it's not an uncommon practice for things early on to not quite sound as they would later on when characters were a little bit more fleshed out. So totally agree with you.
We have Hynden Walsh as Starfire, and she might be the one that I feel sounds the most like how I expected her to sound.
Yeah,
she seems to have kind of been pretty right on the money with what she wanted and what maybe Andrea Romano wanted as the voice director, pretty much right out of the gate. There's maybe the tone changes a little bit, obviously, when her character is fleshed out a little bit more, and she's not just this sort of comedic, naive girl. But I think as far as the main voice, most of her delivery was pretty much exactly how I remembered it.
Yeah, the line with her talking about the pizza toppings, I think, stood out as, okay, this sounds like it definitely could have come straight from Teen Titans Go. Like, yeah, absolutely.
Can we please just order something?
As long as it's vegetarian.
Come on, man. How can you deny me the all-meat experience?
Dude, I've been most of those animals.
I suggest a large pizza with pickles, bananas, and mint frosting.
Starfire? Not everything on the menu is a pizza topping.
There was not a whole lot of difference, and again, I think as the defining voice for this version of this character, she's not the naive, innocent character in the comics necessarily, or perhaps in other versions of this character. But for this version of this character, I think the defining voice.
100%, and that will bring us to our last two Titans here. We have Kari Payton as Cyborg, who probably has the most to do of any of our Titans in this episode. It's a lot of yelling, a lot of exclamations, and reacting to sort of the wacky stuff that's happening. But I think he and Beast Boy's various arguments, and again, something that would become a hallmark of this show and the next show. Their sort of buddy cop dynamic, and them sort of always arguing. It also has maybe my favorite line, which is when they're arguing over toppings and Cyborg suggests pepperoni, and Beast Boy again asserts that he's a vegetarian and won't eat meat, and Cyborg just yells, "There's no meat in pepperoni."
Double pepperoni.
I'm not eating meat.
There's no meat in pepperoni.
Like, it was just this sort of cut off line in the middle of an argument, and they cut to the hive or whatever. I just that line really got me. That one stuck with me all these years later. But I again, we don't get the booyah yet. We don't like you said, we didn't get any of the sort of the classic catchphrases, although we do get one Titans go from Robin, but we don't this is still, as you can say, this is still definitely early on. Everybody's still finding their feet, and that will bring us to Robin, of course. Scott Menville playing the role, much more toned down and serious, and sort of just the no nonsense leader, but still a kind, nice guy in the show. That they kind of get that across, I think, in the final scenes. But overall, I think our voice cast, you can definitely tell it's early on in the series, but I think everybody does their roles pretty well.
Yeah, I think I'm sure. In fact, we know that as this series sort of defined what it was going to go for, when things get a little bit more serious, especially in the later seasons, you have certainly more acting range when, there's episodes where Cyborg is the focus. And as you mentioned, there's this struggle between his own humanity. And then we have Robin, who's battling with, trying to defeat Slade and figure out who Slade is, and suffering defeat from Slade. And then, of course, the Red X character that's brought in and leaves you hanging. And then, of course, you also have, the whole Trigon and Raven storyline. So there's a lot more fleshing out of these characters. And who could forget Beast Boy and Terra, of course, that come into play later on as well. So you have a lot of opportunities for these characters to flex beyond just the initial comedic quipping and maybe just sort of standard dialogue that they were able to kind of get in this episode. So obviously we know that there's a lot more coming from them. I think we'd be remiss not to mention, you can also hear this entire cast, the same five voices, if you check out our review of Wild Cards back in the archives at DCAUreview.com, because this whole cast ended up playing the Royal Flush Gang in that episode of Justice League. So some DCAU performances across the board here. So yeah, I think there's a lot more coming ahead of this entire cast. They are all in their roles for specific reasons, and would eventually, I think, become the defining voices. And there's a reason why they were then recast again, and as these same characters in Teen Titans Go, and continue to be on millions of television sets every year for the next generation to enjoy. So for all those reasons, I didn't think there was a particularly strong performance, maybe outside of Cyborg and some of the opportunity that he gets to sort of mull over the defeat and coming back from being jettisoned to realizing that they didn't defeat the Hive, and then having to deal with the disappointment and trying to figure out how they're going to survive without Robin. Other than that, there wasn't a whole lot, I felt like, voice cast wise, that blew me away. But still, I think a strong enough score of 7 out of 10 for this week for me. What about you?
And Not a big surprise, but I am in total agreement with you. I settled on the exact same score of a 7 out of 10. No, there's not like a super standout moment, but it's just a ton of talented voice actors. Like we said, they're still finding their footing as far as our main cast goes, but still everybody fulfills their roles quite well for what's asked of them in this episode.
All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to that's the bonus point sound here, and that means that one of us is about to assign a bonus point to this dear episode here, and that would be me, at least. I'm throwing in a bonus point here. We talked about it briefly, but I don't know of a better theme song than the Teen Titans theme song. Like let's talk here for the style of show that it is, for the atmosphere setting. They do the cold open generally, or the open of the show, and then you get the breakdown into the theme song. So you get the first 60 seconds to kind of give you a preview of what the episode's going to be, and then the theme generally comes in. And as soon as you hear the first note of that song, like, man, I'm in this. I'm ready to do this. Like, exactly what you're about to watch. It defines the entire series. It's played again for the credits. Or a truncated version of it is played for the credits. And it's just written incredibly well. I think the visuals also for the actual intro. It's not a clip show. It's all pretty much original animation with, characters coming across the screen. And we even have some live action footage of real animals behind Beast Boy that come in. And it's the title itself is just done really, really well. Instantly memorable. An earworm, as I mentioned, that, it's going to be stuck in your head. When we posted it this week on our social media, man, I must have listened to it probably like 10 times straight. It's just so good. Gets stuck in your head. The lines are written so well. And then, of course, we have this version, and then we have the alternate version that's sung in Japanese also. So you have two different versions of the same song. Don't ask me to sing it in Japanese, but I could sing it in English. It's really strong. I think that it itself defines a lot of what this show ended up being, and its influence, certainly Eastern animation influence. And it, like I said, it kind of gives you a sort of 60s spy movie type feel when you're between the music and then the titles matched over top of it. So it sets the tone really for the show that you're about to watch and kind of gets you pumped.
Yeah, no, it definitely has. I think even the guitar riff that you hear is even a little bit based on Secret Agent Man, the song by, I believe, Johnny Rivers. There's a very similar rhythm or melody to that song. And it definitely totally fits with that sort of again, that sort of throwback, like you said, 60s spy, something that could have been in a James Bond movie or something. It's great, but just sort of modernized and having that kids anime feel to it, mixed with that style of music was a really brilliant course of action. And and I think the Puffy Amiyumi do a great job there. The vocals are tremendous in the song. It's a very epic show, and the lyrics really, I think, back that up. It's very exciting. I think especially when you're a kid watching that, it was always very exciting for me. So yeah, I love that as a bonus point.
Never met a villain that they liked.
That's right.
That's the most important thing to remember. All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to the point where we talk about our final scores here. So totaling everything up here. So with my bonus point added here, I come up with a pretty middle of the road 26 out of 40. What about you?
Yeah, and I am just 1 point higher at a 27 out of 40 for my final score. As we get into our rewatchability chat here, I think this is one you have to watch. Not only is it in some ways it's the opening to the series, again, depending on what watch order you go by, but either way, it also includes the debuts of these Hive characters that come back 100 more times in the show, and of course furthering that Slade conspiracy and and furthering that storyline that travels throughout the rest of this season. So yeah, this is an easy, and it is a very easy watch. Like I said, it moves at a very fast pace. There's not a lot to it, but I think, and again, this is another one that you can definitely throw on with with the kids in the room. If you have younger kids, this is definitely, like we said, this was definitely geared towards younger children when it first debuted, and I think that shows. It's very fast paced. I think it's fun, and I think it'll hold their attention, certainly.
Absolutely. Lots of bright colors, lots of fun. And if they're at all familiar with the Teen Titans Go show, they'll probably, it'll fit in just like a glove at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Have they released this on Blu-ray yet?
I think there was a Blu-ray release.
Okay. All right. I was going to say, I know it's on the wonderful HBO Max app, but it's also, if they've released it on Blu-ray, you can pick this up. It's certainly one of those series that you likely want to have in a collection if you're somebody that wants a hard copy of things, or maybe you don't want to subscribe to yet another streaming service. But yeah, I would agree with you. It's important because it's the pilot episode. Essentially, you're introduced to Slade and ultimately, this hive conglomeration that comes back several times, as you mentioned, and it gives you a little taste of the characters and a little bit about their roles, even if it's not quite like this is this person's role, this is this person's. It kind of gives you a general idea how the series is going to go before these characters are fleshed out. So agreed. All right, Liam. Well, that will wrap us up for this week's episode. And believe it or not, the month of September here. Thank you all for tuning in and checking us out. Don't forget, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor. We're on iHeartRadio. We're pretty much on any of the major podcast apps that you can think of. If you do subscribe to us on there already, thank you very much, first and foremost. Second of all, if you're looking to help us out, we have a couple ways that you could do that as a thank you. We would appreciate that. You could go ahead and leave us a review if your podcast app so allows you to do so. A 5-star one would help us out a lot. And if you feel comfortable leaving a little paragraph about what it is that you enjoy about the show, gives potential listeners an idea of what they're headed into as we try and get more ears on the podcast, as we always say. If you're also looking to support us in another way, you can also follow us on social media, and that will also benefit you because you'll get an idea of not only what our topics will be for the month. We post clips, we post upcoming episodes, all kinds of news about stuff happening in both the DCAU world, as well as direct-to-video DC animation, and so much more. You can follow us at DCAU Review on both Instagram and Twitter. Also, if you're looking to throw a little money our way, money, you say, you're feeling super generous. Well, pick yourself up a shirt or a hat, maybe a mug at the DCAU Review shop. You can go over to DCAUreview.com, click on the shop tab. It'll take you directly over to our store. And hey, if you're feeling generous, pick yourself up a shirt. There's generally, I will give you this life hack is if you go and there's not a coupon available, wait a week or two, and I bet you there'll be a coupon that pops up. Probably not good for sales on my end to tell you to wait to not spend your money if you're feeling the impulse. But hey, we like to help people out here. So yeah, there's generally a lot of coupons that they put up there for free shipping or 20% off or something like that. So look for those at the top of the screen. Also, Liam, you can subscribe to us on the Pod Tower on YouTube. Of course, we share that channel with a couple of our friends from Watchtower Database, as well as Tim Talk, fellow podcasts, and DCAU DC animation content up there. So support us by going and subscribing to that channel. If you like us, that helps us a lot. Like our videos, our entire catalog is available both there and at DCAUreview.com. All right, Liam, enough shilling. I think it's time that we begin talking about what we'll be covering in the next month, which is the month of Rocktober. No, we're not doing rock-themed episodes, at least not that I'm aware of, but we will be covering a new show.
That is right, Cal. And next month, for the month of October, we will be returning to the one that started it all. That's right, we're returning to Batman, the animated series. And since we review all of those in order, we are picking up right where we left off in the production order with a very memorable episode, that being The Mechanic.
Oh, love that one. Another one of those that you think about, you're like, man, this doesn't have a flashy villain. This can't possibly be entertaining, but from my recollection, is a great story. So, looking forward to covering that one with you. Also, don't forget on our same podcast feed here, you can check out our bonus episodes. We are covering the Batman: The Adventures Continue comic book series, which just released its latest issue. So you want to check out our review of that if you're interested. Check that out. Lots of great stuff happening in the DCAU world, and Liam cannot wait to jump back to our roots, covering Batman the Animated Series next week. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Adios.